Okay, in part 3 I'm going to go over things that I forgot to mention in parts 1 and 2. And first of all, one of the things I forgot to mention is that I was in an apartment at the time. And this was actually an old house that the landlord turned into these, there were like only 5 apartments. And he one of them was rented out to me. And the first couple months or so that I was there, there was only one other person, and I didn't hear much from them. But then later on, there were like, eventually almost all the apartments ended up getting filled up. And at the time, you know, once again, I wasn't aware of anything that was going on. You know, I didn't know a lot. I didn't know about gang stalking. I didn't know about you know, the bad stuff that's in your tap water or anything like that. So I didn't think anything out of the ordinary was going on. But I have a whole list of things here that I forgot to cover. One thing was, I was watching television, and I was watching Channel 4 or something, and I noticed when I was watching the channel, all of a sudden the channel changed even though I didn't change the channel. You know, I didn't use the remote to change the channel or anything, but suddenly I noticed it was on Channel 5. And I'm like, that's weird. I know that there's no remote around me, so I don't know how that happened. But what was really weird is that when I went to look at the display on the TV to see what channel it was on, it said it was still on Channel 4 even though I was watching Channel 5. And as soon as I switched the channel and went to Channel 5, then it was Channel 5 was Channel 5 and Channel 4 was Channel 4. But I don't know how it happened, but for some reason I was on Channel 4 and it got switched to Channel 5, but it still said I was on Channel 4. And this isn't the first time that happened. I thought, well, that was a weird coincidence, you know, or that was some weird thing that happened. But this would happen again where I'd be watching, like, you know, Channel 9 and it would get switched to Channel 11 even though I didn't change it, and it would still say it was on Channel 9. So that's a really weird thing that happened. And then I also got phone calls from people. Like, I would get some prank calls, like somebody would call and I don't know, they would say like, is Jeff there or something? That's not my name. And I would say, nope, I'm sorry, you have the wrong number. She'd be like, oh, okay, sorry about that. And then she'd stop and she'd be like, hey, so what are you doing? I'm like, so I was just playing along. I'm like, oh, I don't know, I'm just watching television. What are you up to? And then, you know, she was trying to make it look like she was interested in me or something. But I played along for a little bit, but then I was like, whatever, you know, I gotta go. I'm like, I'll see you later. And I hung up the phone. And like an hour later, she'd call back again. And she would start, you know, going over the same things like, so, you know, so what are you doing? Like, do you have a girlfriend and all this stuff? And I was like, okay, this is getting weird. I don't want you. I get that you're doing these prank calls, but you better not call back again, okay? So I hung up, and ever since then, I guess she got the message and she didn't call back again. But I also had a bunch of other weird things where you get a bunch of wrong number calls that sound like they're accidental, but they were probably intentional. And another thing that happened, I had a neighbor that moved in, or in an apartment adjacent to me from across the hall. And one time he came in and he was asking, do you have any butter? We're out of butter. Do you have any butter? I was like, well, that's kind of weird. It's like, you know, why can't you just go to the store or something? So I'm like, okay, well, I have a little bit here. You can have this, whatever I have left here. And he's like, okay. And then, like, the next day he comes back in, and then he asked for something else. I can't remember what it was. But at that point it was kind of weird. It was like, so I told him like, well, why don't you go buy it if you really need it, you know? And he's like, oh, okay, sorry, I didn't really need it that bad. It's like, okay, that's weird. And then, let's see, I'm trying to find out something else that happened here. Oh, and then the same guy, like a week later or something, and at the time this happened, like I told you before in the previous parts of the videos, that I was having issues with my computer, and I was constantly trying to figure out what was wrong with it. Well, you know, just a coincidence, of course. He invited me into his apartment, and he was supposedly having problems with his computer. You know, he had it all tore apart in there, and he was going through it. And he was telling me like, well, this computer, I just can't get it to reboot. You know, I tried reinstalling Windows and everything. And, you know, and I'm like, well, I can't remember what it was, but it was some really silly problem where it was a really easy fix. And I'm like, this is all you have to do, okay? And then I left after that. And he's like, okay, fine. And, you know, at the time, I just thought it was a little strange. I didn't suspect anything. But then later on, when I found out about this stuff, and you know, you flash back to this kind of stuff, and like, you talk about, and you read on websites about people moving into apartments next to you and doing, you know, asking you weird questions and getting weird phone calls, and, you know, that's when you start figuring out, no, that was intentional. That was not just, you know, just a neighbor being weird or whatever. Now this is the part that gets really strange. At the time, I was having lots of problems falling asleep. Like, I just could not fall asleep no matter how hard I tried. I would like sit there and my eyes, you know, I would close my eyes and I would get that caffeine sensation that they talk about where you can't fall asleep. It felt like, you know, you just drank like all kinds of coffee and you just, for whatever reason, you cannot sleep. And I had only gotten like, you know, a few hours of sleep the past few nights before that. So I'm like, I should be really tired right now. There's no reason why I shouldn't be able to fall asleep. So that was really frustrating at the time. Another contributing factor that later I found out about is that I had my wireless router on and I had my computer on sleep. And that probably played a factor in keeping me awake, you know, because they can use, it sounds bizarre, but they can somehow use, you know, any electromagnetic field that's around you. They can manipulate it somehow to like keep you awake and stuff like that. But I had no idea about that kind of stuff at the time. You know, I was completely clueless about all this stuff. But anyway, when I tried going to sleep, like I said, I could not. This happened for like, you know, a week or two, where I was only getting like a couple hours of sleep at night, if at all. Like I would just have my eyes closed the whole night, and I never actually fell asleep. So I got to the point where I was so tired one night where, you know, the sleep deprivation stuff that was going on didn't even affect me. I just fell into a hard sleep, but it would only last for like a couple hours, and then I would just be jolted awake, you know, out of nowhere after like an hour or two of falling asleep. And when I woke up, I was really extremely thirsty. This happens to me now where I'll wake up and, you know, you'll be thirsty for whatever reason. Like, I don't know if it's, you know, microwaves or whatever, but this was really, really bad when I was in my apartment. I noticed it was like, you know, 10, 20 times worse than it is now. And this was at the time when I was drinking lots of tap water, and I didn't know about all the crap that they can put in there. So what happened is I would wake up and I'd be extremely dehydrated and thirsty, so I would go get a glass of water and I would just chug like a whole glass, and then I'd fall back asleep really tired again. An hour later I'd be jolted up awake again, and I'd be extremely dehydrated, really thirsty. I'd go get a glass of water, I'd chug down the whole thing again, and the same thing would happen again. That cycle would repeat, you know, like 3 times a night. I'm like, this is, after a while, it's like, this is not normal. This is very weird. You know, it's normal room temperature. It's like 70 degrees. There's no reason why I should be this thirsty. It just didn't make any sense at all. So I was really weirded out by that. But during the time this would happen too, sometimes I would wake up and I would be totally drenched from sweating. This wasn't just like, you know, being a little overheated or something, or having a, you know, like having a nightmare waking up. This would just be like, I would just wake up and my whole forehead, or the whole back of my head would just be complete sweat. So something was making me dehydrate and sweat like crazy, and I could not figure out what was going on at the time.